The morning was crisp, the sky painted in hues of gold and blue as the first light touched my family's 2,000-acre farm. For over 4 generations, this land had been my family's legacy. Our blood, sweat, and sacrifice woven into every blade of grass, every row of crops. I had been up since dawn, guiding my tractor through the fields, just like my grandfather taught me decades ago. Then my phone buzzed, and buzzed again. 10 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 1 email from the Greenfield Estates Homeowners Association. Subject line, violation notice. I nearly choked on my coffee. HOA? I didn't belong to any HOA. My land had been here since 1892, long before their pristine, overpriced homes popped up. With a scowl, I opened the letter. Your tractor noise disrupts the peaceful enjoyment of our community. Your livestock causes unpleasant odors that lower property values. Cease all farming activities within 800 feet of our residences or face a $200 daily fine. I laughed, out loud, bitterly. They had no authority over my farm. But as I scrolled further, my blood ran cold. Effective last month, Greenfield Estates HOA is now the rightful owner of 800 acres of your land. My land. Stolen. Sold behind my back. And that's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. This was war. HOA stole my land, but they forgot one thing. I'm not a man who backs down. My hands shook as I reread the email. 800 acres. Gone. Transferred. Stolen right from under me. My family had bled for this land for over 130 years, and some suburban busybodies thought they could erase that with a few fake documents. I stormed inside, heart pounding, and yanked open my filing cabinet. My property deeds, tax records, all untouched. No signatures, no agreements. I never sold a damn thing. Then a sharp knock at the door. Standing on my porch in a crisp white suit that didn't belong anywhere near a farm was Veronica Blake, president of Greenfield Estates HOA. Flanking her were 2 smug-looking men in polo shirts, their HOA logos gleaming under the morning sun. Mr. Grayson, Veronica cooed, stepping forward. I assume you've read our letter? I crossed my arms, glaring. Oh, I read it. And now you're going to explain to me how in the hell you think you own my land. Her fake smile didn't waver. We don't think, Mr. Grayson. We do. According to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your land is now part of Greenfield Estates and subject to our regulations. I clenched my fists. That was a lie. My property tax bills hadn't changed, and no one, not a single official, had ever contacted me about an expiration. Times change, Veronica continued smoothly. Our community has certain standards. Our residents paid premium prices for homes with guaranteed property values. Your farm, well, it's outdated. It's time for progress. She handed me a folder. Cease all farming operations within 800 feet of our residences within 48 hours, or face legal consequences. I laughed. You think some rich yuppies in cookie-cutter mansions get to tell me how to run my farm? Lady, this land was here before your HOA existed, and it'll be here long after you're gone. Her smile turned ice cold. We'll see about that. With that, she turned on her heel and strode back to her sleek black SUV, leaving me clutching the so-called official documents. I barely had time to process what had just happened when my cousin Alex called. He served on the town council and his voice was laced with urgency. Uncle Tom, listen to me. They've been planning this for months. Veronica's been having private meetings with developers, big ones. Something shady is going on. Private meetings, developers, expired exemptions that never existed. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just about noise complaints or property values. This was a full-blown land grab. And I was the target. I spent that night digging through every legal record I could find, determined to uncover the truth. And what I found? It changed everything. What I discovered next will shock you. They didn't just steal my land. They were hiding something far worse. Comment #JusticeForFarmers if you're with me. And if you think I let them get away with this, think again, like for more. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. HOA stole my land, but they made one big mistake, underestimating me. I didn't sleep that night. With only the dim glow of my desk lamp, I pored over every document, every record, every scrap of paper tied to my land. My agricultural exemption was still valid for another 5 years. Veronica had lied to my face. By 3 a.m., I had pieced together something even worse. This wasn't just a case of HOA overreach. It was fraud. At sunrise, I drove straight to the county records office. The clerk, Mrs. Rivera, had known my family for decades. When she pulled up my file, I saw the flicker of concern in her eyes before she even spoke. Tom, something isn't right. She turned the screen toward me. My official property records had been altered 6 weeks ago. The system now showed that 800 acres had been transferred to Greenfield Estates Community Trust. Transferred? I barely recognized my own voice. By who? She hesitated, then pointed to the signature line. My name. I felt the room tilt. My signature was right there, bold and clear. Except, I had never signed a damn thing. My hands clenched into fists. I need copies, now. She printed everything. I grabbed the papers and stormed out, heart pounding. Someone had forged my name, and now I had proof. I barely made it home before my phone rang. Sheriff Logan Davis. Tom, we need to talk. Within minutes, he was on my porch, hat in hand. He'd been a friend of mine for years, but today, his expression was grim. Look, I don't like this any more than you do, he said, but I need to let you know, we're getting noise complaints, daily. I scoffed. Let me guess. Veronica and her HOA goons? He sighed. Yeah. And that's not all. They've started a petition to declare your farm a public nuisance. I felt a slow, burning anger crawl up my spine. They weren't just trying to steal my land. They were trying to paint me as the problem. Lol. Then Logan lowered his voice. Tom, there was a closed-door meeting last week. County officials, developers, the HOA board, hell, even some state representatives. And they weren't just talking about your farm. My gut clenched. What do you mean? He hesitated. They're planning something bigger, something that could push you, and every farmer in this county, out for good. Before I could respond, I saw them. Men in suits, standing in my eastern fields, taking pictures, measuring land. I was in the middle of a war, and they had just fired the first shot. I slammed my truck door shut so hard the windows rattled. The men in suits, surveyors, developers, whoever they were, stood in my eastern fields like they already owned the place, pointing, jotting notes, taking measurements. I gunned the engine and tore across the uneven dirt, dust kicking up in my wake. As I pulled up, the tallest of them, a man in a slick navy suit with a clipboard, turned to face me. Can I help you, gentlemen? I said, my voice tight. The tall man extended a hand. James Miller, Westview Development Corporation. We're just conducting a survey of our new property. I didn't shake it. Your property? Miller frowned and pulled out a tablet. According to our records, Westview purchased 800 acres from Greenfield Estates HOA 3 weeks ago. Construction begins next month. My blood ran cold. They'd already sold it. I snatched the tablet from his hands. There it was, official county document stamped and signed, showing my fields under new ownership. The seller listed was Greenfield Estates Community Trust, Veronica's HOA. My grip tightened on the screen. There's been a mistake. This is my land. Miller gave me a condescending smile. Then I suggest you take it up with the HOA. As far as we're concerned, the deal is done. He nodded to his men, and they went back to their work, dismissing me like I didn't even exist. I wanted to put my fist through his smug face, but I forced myself to turn and drive home. Fists wouldn't win this war, but I knew something that would. That night, I went digging, literally. Buried in my grandfather's old wooden chest, beneath yellow deeds and tax records, I found it. The original water rights agreement from 1948. My great-grandfather had made a deal with the county when they built the reservoir that now fed water to every home in Greenfield Estates. The document was clear. Agricultural use would always take priority. And the best part? The main control junction for the entire water supply sat on the 200 acres I still legally owned. Veronica and her HOA goons might think they could steal my land, but they forgot one thing. Without my farm, they had no water. By dawn, I was on the phone with the State Water Authority. I wasn't just going to fight for my land. I was going to choke them out before they even realized what hit them. HOA stole my land. But now they're running out of water. By noon the next day, the first complaints started rolling in. The Greenfield Estates Facebook group exploded with posts. Why is my water pressure so low? Anyone else having issues? Can't even run my sprinklers? HOA better fix this ASAP. I'm not paying for a house with no water. I sat on my porch, sipping coffee, watching the chaos unfold. They had no idea what was happening yet. Then my phone rang. 17 missed calls, all from Veronica Blake. I let her sweat for a few more minutes before answering. What did you do? She shrieked the moment I picked up. I leaned back in my chair, calm as could be. Nothing illegal. The entire community has no water. People can't shower, can't cook. The county is threatening fines. What did you do? I let the silence stretch before answering. I exercised my water rights. You remember those, don't you, Veronica? She went quiet. She knew. I could almost hear her scrambling for a response, but there was nothing she could say. Legally, I was in the right. The 1948 agreement was ironclad. Agriculture took priority, and since I had suddenly lost 800 acres of farmland, I was well within my rights to reroute the supply. Finally, her voice returned, but it was different now, controlled, almost pleading. Listen, Tom, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. There's no need for things to escalate like this. Let's talk compensation. Compensation? I let out a sharp laugh. The time for talking was before you stole my land, Veronica. She sucked in a breath, trying to maintain composure. Be reasonable. You can't just cut off an entire neighborhood. People have children, elderly parents. They need water to live. I sat forward, voice dropping to a deadly calm. And I need land to farm, to feed those same people. But you didn't care about that, did you? Silence. Then, a second voice in the background. Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer. For God's sake, Veronica, fix this. The developers are freaking out. Construction has halted. If we don't get the water back, they're pulling out of the deal. So that was it. They weren't worried about the residents. They were worried about their money. I sighed, standing up. You want water? Fine. You know what you need to do. Veronica's voice dropped to a whisper. That's impossible. The contracts are signed. Then we have nothing more to discuss? I hung up. Outside, the sun blazed over my crops, the irrigation system running strong. HOA wanted to play dirty? They had no idea who they were messing with. HOA stole my land. Now they're begging me for water. The first signs of trouble hit early in the morning. I was standing in my fields, watching the sun rise over the rich soil, when I saw the first group of Greenfield Estates residents wandering outside in their bathrobes, confused. A few of them turned on their hoses. Nothing. Sprinklers, dry. By mid-morning, the entire neighborhood was in chaos. Phones rang off the hook at the HOA office. The private community's pristine lawns, once the envy of the town, were starting to bake under the summer heat. People were posting furious messages online, demanding answers. And right in the middle of it all, Veronica Blake. By noon, she showed up in my driveway. I watched from my porch as she climbed out of her luxury black SUV, her designer heels sinking into the dirt. Her usual smug confidence was gone, replaced by a barely concealed panic. Tom, she started, voice strained but still holding on to whatever power she thought she had. We need to talk. I took a slow sip of my iced tea. Go on, I'm listening. She crossed her arms. We have a serious situation. The entire neighborhood is out of water. The county is breathing down my neck. People are threatening lawsuits. This needs to be fixed, now. I set my glass down. Not my problem. She flinched like I'd slapped her. What do you mean, not your problem? You cut the water supply. I smiled. I exercised my legal water rights. That reservoir was built under the condition that agriculture comes first. Since you took 800 acres of my farmland, my remaining land now requires all available water to sustain production. Nothing personal, just following the law. Her jaw clenched. You're deliberately starving families of water. I tilted my head. No, I'm prioritizing my crops, the same way you prioritize property values over my farm. Funny how that works, isn't it? She took a slow breath, trying to regain control. Maybe there's a way to work this out. There it was, desperation. Compensation, Tom. We can arrange a settlement, a buyout. You'd never have to farm again? I laughed. That's cute. But I don't want money, Veronica. I want my land. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Behind her, I could see Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer, pacing near his car, sweating through his expensive shirt. Then, I heard him hiss at her. Veronica, fix this. The developers are threatening to pull out. The whole deal is falling apart. So that was it. They didn't care about the people. They cared about the money. I leaned forward. Sounds like you've got a real mess in your hands. She glared at me. Turn the water back on. I gave her a slow smile. Give me my land back. She stared at me, fury and fear battling behind her eyes. For the first time since this all started, I saw it. She knew she was losing. That night, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. News had spread fast. Greenfield Estates was completely out of water. Faucets ran dry. Toilets wouldn't flush. Restaurants inside the development had to shut down. Residents were furious. And Veronica, she was drowning. At 11:42 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find her standing there, her perfect blonde hair slightly out of place, her usually flawless posture slumped. Her makeup was smudged, and for the first time, she didn't look like the powerful HOA president. She looked desperate. Please, she whispered, her voice cracking. Turn the water back on. I leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Sounds serious, I said, feigning concern. Maybe you should be angry at the people who created this situation. Her lips trembled. Behind her, in the distance, I could see porch lights flickering on across Greenfield Estates. No one was sleeping tonight. They were all realizing the same thing. They'd never once questioned where their water came from. Veronica took a shaky breath. We can talk about compensation. I shook my head. I don't want your money. Her hands clenched at her sides. That land deal is final, Tom. There's nothing I can do. I gave her a slow, cold smile. Then neither can I. She let out a breath, stepping closer, lowering her voice like she was trying to strike a deal in some back alley. The developers, she said, glancing over her shoulder. They might reconsider if there's a problem with utilities. They'll have to renegotiate terms. Ah, now we were getting somewhere. I folded my arms. Tomorrow, 9 a.m., my kitchen table. Bring the developers, your lawyer, and all those fake documents you used to steal my land. She hesitated. I could see her calculating, debating whether she still had a way out of this. She didn't. Finally, she nodded. Fine. As she turned to leave, I called after her. One more thing, Veronica. She paused, shoulders tense. You've spent months making my life hell. Lying, stealing, trying to erase my family's legacy. I stepped onto the porch, watching her face. You thought I was just some old farmer you could push around. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed hard. I smiled. Now you know better. She left without another word. As I watched her taillights disappear, I knew one thing for sure. Tomorrow, I was getting my land back. HOA stole my land. But now they're the ones facing judgment. The next morning, my kitchen table was surrounded. Across from me sat Veronica Blake, her lawyer, and a visibly sweating Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer. Next to them, two representatives from Westview Development Corporation, both of them looking extremely uncomfortable. I took my time pouring coffee, letting the silence stretch. Finally, Veronica cleared her throat. Let's get to it, Tom. You've made your point. The water situation is unfortunate, but it's affecting innocent families. Surely we can come to a reasonable agreement. I leaned forward, lacing my fingers together. Sure, I get my land back. Veronica's smile faltered. That's not possible. The Westview representative, a middle-aged man named Greg Davis, shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Grayson, let's be clear. We purchased the land legally. We were told there were no disputes, no existing claims. We moved forward in good faith. I slid a folder across the table. And you were lied to. Davis hesitated before flipping it open. Inside were county records, historical deeds, and a forensic report proving my signature had been forged on the transfer documents. I saw his face darken as he scanned the pages. Richard let out a small, panicked noise. Veronica shot him a glare but didn't say a word. Davis looked up, his voice sharp. Is this true? Veronica stayed silent. Richard, on the other hand, cracked like a dam bursting in a flood. It was Veronica's idea, he blurted. She told us we could bury the paperwork under rezoning technicalities. She said no one would question it. Veronica whipped her head around. Shut up, Richard. But it was too late. Davis closed the folder and sighed, rubbing his temples. This changes everything. He turned to his associate. We need to put a freeze on all development immediately. This is a legal nightmare. I sat back, arms crossed. I'll tell you what's going to happen. You're going to void the land sale. You're going to return every acre back to me, and you're going to do it today. Davis didn't even argue. Fine. Veronica, on the other hand, was seething. You can't do this. The contracts... Davis cut her off. Are fraudulent. If we move forward, we open ourselves up to lawsuits, fines, and criminal charges. He turned back to me. We'll handle the reversal paperwork. But Mr. Grayson, I'd strongly suggest you take legal action against the HOA I grind. Oh, don't worry. That's already in motion. Veronica slammed her hands on the table. You don't know who you're messing with, I chuckled. Neither did you. She stormed out, her heels clicking hard against the floor. Richard scurried after her like a frightened puppy. As I watched them leave, I felt it. For the first time in months, I was winning. By sundown, the land was officially mine again. But for Veronica, her real battle was just beginning. By the time the sun set over my fields, the land was officially mine again. The fraudulent sale was reversed, the developers pulled out, and Greenfield Estates was in complete chaos. But Veronica Blake? She had no idea how much worse it was about to get. The downfall begins. The next morning, the headlines were everywhere. HOA president exposed in massive land fraud scandal. Developers pull out after HOA caught in legal nightmare. Local farmer takes on HOA and wins. News vans camped outside Veronica's house. Reporters shoved microphones in her face, demanding answers, but she had none. Her carefully curated world of power, intimidation, and fake smiles crumbled overnight. Then came the lawsuits. Multiple homeowners in Greenfield Estates sued the HOA, furious that their money had been used for shady land deals instead of maintaining their perfect little neighborhood. Some demanded refunds, others wanted her arrested. And speaking of arrests, the investigation hits hard. By the end of the week, the district attorney announced a full criminal investigation. Turns out the land grab wasn't just about me. Veronica and her cronies had been involved in fraudulent property deals for years. When forensic analysts examined HOA bank records, guess what they found? Huge cash deposits, unexplained transfers, money funneled into secret accounts. Richard Thompson, the HOA treasurer, cut a deal instantly. He confessed everything. He even handed over private emails proving Veronica orchestrated the entire scheme. And just like that, she was finished. 1 week after she stood in my kitchen begging for water, Veronica Blake was led out of her gated mansion in handcuffs. Meanwhile, back at the farm. As for me, I was right where I belonged, on my land. The first thing I did? Expanded production. The 800 acres they tried to steal were now thriving, feeding families across the county. And Greenfield Estates? The new HOA board, made up of actual decent people, reached out to me. They proposed a farmers market partnership. Instead of fighting against agriculture, they wanted to support it. Imagine that. 1 year after this war began, something incredible happened. The community actually came together. But what about Veronica? I know some of you are wondering. What happened to her? Well, let's just say she lost everything. Her assets were seized to pay back the victims. Her house was foreclosed. Her husband left her. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison for fraud and conspiracy. And me? I saw her once, months later. She was driving an old beat-up car passing by my farm. She slowed down just enough to see the field she once tried to destroy. Greener, stronger than ever. I gave her a polite wave. She didn't wave back. This story isn't just about land, it's about justice. It's about fighting back when people think they can walk all over you. It's about never underestimating the ones who built this country from the ground up. So, let me ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Drop a 1 in the comments if you think justice was served. And if you want more insane real-life stories like this, hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, I've got plenty more. This was just the beginning.